like to call the Finance Administration Committee meeting to order. First order of business is roll call.
Teresa Taylor.
Here.
David Miller.
Here.
Henry Jones.
Here.
Matthew Saha for Fiona Ma.
Here.
Stacy Oliveris.
Here.
Jason Perez.
Here.
Ramon Rubalcava.
Here.
Okay, so I think that our next order of business is election of the committee's chair and vice chair. And for that, I'm going to hand the gavel over to David Miller. There you go. And you can have that little thing there.
Okay. Do I call for nominations? Or just I make, okay.
You're nominated.
Okay, I would like to nominate Teresa Taylor for chair of the Finance and Administration Committee.
And then,
I'm looking at a second from Honorable Kava. Any other nominations? Any other nominations? And a third time, any other nominations? Okay, hearing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor of Teresa Taylor by unanimous acclamation, or whatever it is. There's no one opposing. Aye?
Aye.
any nays?
Okay, the ayes have it. Any nays? The ayes have it. Congratulations, Ms. Taylor.
Thank you. You could have. There you go.
Mr. Miller,
While I've got the hammer,
Mr. Miller, for the record, you do need to ask for any no votes.
oh, I thought I did.
He did just a second ago.
He asked for no votes?
Yeah.
I didn't hear it. Okay, sorry.
Okay. So now the election of Vice Chair of Finance Administration, and excuse me, I'd like to nominate David Miller. Are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Hearing no other nominations, I'd like to take a vote for David Miller for Vice Chair by acclamation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. Motion carries. Congratulations, Mr. Miller.
Thank you.
All right. Please be patient. I have a cold. We are moving to approval of the February 18th, 2020 Finance Administration Committee meeting agenda. Can I get a move for approval?
Move it. Second.
It's moved by Mr. Jones, seconded by Mr. Miller. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Looks like we are on the executive report. Mr. Cohen.
Good morning, Michael Cohen with CalPERS. Congratulations to retaining your seat. Just a couple notes administratively. There were some updates on materials. Your materials are updated. There's copies in the back for anyone in the audience who wants them. My only other note was on 60, one of our employers, which if we go through the presentation there, then we can hit it at that point. But
Okay.
otherwise, that's all I've got for you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cohen. So our next item is 5 action consent items. And anybody want to move the action consent items?
So moved.
Okay, so I got a move from Mr. Jones, second from Mr. Miller. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. So item 6, information consent items, based on what Mr. Cohen said, I'd like to pull 6D for Mr. Cohen to give us a report on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn it over to Arnita Page, who runs our employer contract unit, and she can walk through the PowerPoint that's in your materials and also highlight the one thing that we wanted to talk about.
Okay, great.
Good morning. Arnita Page, CalPERS team member. I'm here to provide an update on our reporting on participating employers. If we could go to slide 2, our termination report, An update since we last reported. We had 5 agencies who provided their final resolution to terminate, and we had 2 agencies who paid their termination cost in full.
Wow, that's good.
I'd like to move now to our collections report. This report provides an update on our collection activity, and this is for quarter through December 2019. This quarter, we had 1 agency, Samoa Fire Protection District, who reported a temporary financial challenge with paying their unfunded liability payments. So you can see they're actually in the 61 to 90-day column. We provided the temporary payment plan to this agency to assist them. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to have you go a little bit. So the payment plan for that department is, and this, as I understand it, this particular entity has only retirees, correct?
Correct.
Could
They
you
are.
kind of go into that a little bit
Yes, I
for us?
can. They have a total of, it's a small agency. They have no active members. They have a total of 9 members in total, 8 of which are retirees and 1 of which is a surviving benefit. Is there anything specific I want to make sure in terms of answering? Was there?
No, you're going
Okay.
perfectly fine. I just wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of what this was.
Sure.
And so they are on a payment plan. They entered on a payment plan basically, and I mean.
Oh, yeah, I can expand on that.
Yeah.
What we did is we worked with them, and they provided information on what their challenges were, and they were temporary in nature. And what we did is we looked at their financial statements going back the last 5 years and did an assessment in terms of their ability to pay and what the future cash projections were, where they have a few upcoming revenue opportunities that were very strong. So we established a payment plan based on that.
Okay, great. Okay, that's kind of what I wanted to get out to the committee. Are there any questions on this? Hold on just a second. Ms. Brown.
Hi.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations. I have a question about just sort of process. I'm on page 2 of 8 on the PowerPoint.
Sure.
And what we see here is a list of agency who have basically giving you a notice of intent to terminate. So if I sort of just look at the first one, Central Sierra, they gave us a notice in 2011, a final resolution to terminate. So is that an agreement we signed with them?
Yes, the final resolution to terminate is their board passing a resolution to actually terminate the contract.
Okay, so it took them 8 years to do that.
Yes.
Okay, that's a long time. And then, but you don't have anything in the other 2 columns. So are we currently calculating that termination cost?
Absolutely. So the next step after we receive the final resolution is the termination cost is calculated. And that's what's happening with these agencies. Once that report is completed and returned to the employers, if they have an amount owed after the termination, then they'll receive a bill, and then from there, we will collect the termination costs as due.
And so how long does it take us to do that? Because it's been more than 6 months, according to, right? It's March, and this was August, so it's...
So I'm looking, okay, that's a good question. I mean, it normally takes, the final termination valve can take up to 90 days. There's also communication going back and forth with the agency on validating the data.
Oh, so
It
in
can
case
take
they
a little
disagree,
time.
in case they disagree, because
Yes.
there's analysis.
There's
Okay,
some time there as well.
all right, thank you. I just
You're
wanted to get an
welcome.
understanding of the
Anytime.
process. So 8 years is an anomaly, I would assume, right?
Yes, we recently passed legislation, so we won't see that. They have up to a year, and if they, from the time that they notice us, and then if they don't do it, they have to start over.
They have to do another notice of
Yes.
intent.
So
Okay.
these,
So we won't see another one of those.
no.
All right, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, thank you. Ms. Middleton.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations as well. I'm on page 5 of the handout, Appendix 2.
Yes.
Okay, and this is very helpful information, and I'm not expecting you to answer this now, but I do have some more specific questions. I would like to dig down on this report and be able to identify the cities, the counties, the special districts, all by name. And then within the name, I would like to know, to the best of our knowledge, how many public safety employees and how many miscellaneous employees are attached to each one of these organizations, and what was the date of incorporation?
Okay, we can work on that for you.
Okay. And in case there's any questions, purpose of my digging into this is there is a considerable amount of, I believe, misinformation out in the public regarding funded status and what leads to funded status. And if we can dig down into this data in more detail, I believe we can break some of those myths. Thank you.
All right, so, Mr. Cohen, and you had mentioned also that we're looking at a different report anyway? But can we
Yes.
add this to the menu of things?
Absolutely. We'll get started on that as committee direction, but we provide this report to you quarterly. We are going to take a fresh look at how we present this. I think we can do a better job in making it clear in terms of some of the questions we got this morning.
Okay, great, thank you. So, seeing no further questions from the committee, it looks like we're moving on to agenda item 7A, review of Finance Administration Committee delegation. If you want to go over that, Mr.
Sure,
Cohen?
thank you. Normally, every year we review the committee's delegation and would put it on an action consent item. This year, we wanted to bring it to you for discussion based on last year's work streams. Work stream 3 talked about trying to put these things in plain English, so you'll see the rest of today each of the committees sort of bringing the delegations to you to convert the language as best we can into plain English. So basically what we've done is strip out a lot of the resolved and sort of the prelude to the delegation. The content itself is largely the same, but we did want to sort of identify that we're following through on your work stream conclusions and recommendations.
Great, and I think you and I spoke about this, but where it's citing government code sections, I'm wondering if we wanted to put that in a citation at the end or an index of some kind, so that we just know that they're there. We don't have to cite it in the whole thing, but...
Sure. Why don't I take that as committee direction to prepare kind of a summary of all of the code sections that are referenced in the existing resolutions that are about to go away.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Ms. Brown.
Thank you. On attachment 2, page 2 of 4, Mr. Cohen, one of the changes, the first paren 1, it used to say approve enterprise-wide budgets and resource allocations and oversee the budget process. And so with this change in delegation, the committee is no longer overseeing the budget process, and instead we are approving the budget policy. So tell me what the change is.
I would say this is largely just reflective of current practice. The budget policy sort of lays out the board's overall vision of the budget process, and then the budget process is more sort of a management responsibility to put a budget together and bring it to you in April. But I don't view this as being a substantive change in any information that the board is going to see or anything that will change in terms of the process itself.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other questions from the committee, we are now moving on to 7B, CalPERS retired member election results and review of board elections.
That one is an
Oh, that was an action item. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair.
So I need to move the review of the committee delegation. It was moved by Mr. Miller. Seconded by Mr. Jones. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. I'm sorry. And second one, this is also an action item, 7B, CalPERS retired member election results and review of board election program.
And this one, I'm going to turn over to Dallas Stone and Kim Mom to run through the results and some recommendations for you.
Great.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Kim Malm, CalPERS team member. I think all of you are probably aware that for the last 10 months I've been over in the health branch. And during that time, Dallas Stone, my assistant division chief in operations, has been running the operations division. So he gets the pleasure today to present this board election item to you guys. But before he starts, I just want to say thank you to Dallas for all of his hard work and to the team, the board election team that works really hard on this and tries to come up with some ideas for you guys every 4 years on things that you consider to make make the process better. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dallas Stone.
Thanks, Kim. Good morning. Members of the Finance and Administration Committee, Dallas Stone, CalPERS team member. This is an action item that will cover the 2019 retired member election results and a review of the board elections program. We will be discussing our voter experience over the last election cycle and seeking direction on options for the upcoming 2021 through 2024 election cycle. The retired member position was decided by a majority vote, and Henry Jones was elected with 65.97% of the votes. The election was officially certified by the Secretary of State on October 17, 2019. The term of office is January 16, 2020 through January 15, 2024. Congratulations, Mr. Jones, on his reelection. The following is a summary of those results. Voter turnout for the election was 116,065 votes out of 604,192 eligible voters, which was 19.7%. The paper ballot was the most popular voting method, coming in at 77.84%, followed by online voting at 17.41% and telephone voting at 4.75%. We continue to partner with the Office of Public Affairs and Stakeholder Relations on outreach efforts focused on increasing voter awareness and participation. A number of those outreach efforts included 2 email blasts reminding voters to participate. On September 6, 2019, we sent approximately 348,000 emails. 36.61% of those emails were opened. On September 23, 2019, we sent approximately 346,000 emails, and 35.31% of those emails were opened. There were 7 press releases sent with election updates, beginning with the notice of election and ending with the election results. The public affairs team posted 18 Facebook messages, 17 Twitter messages, and 6 LinkedIn messages. We recorded and posted candidate statement videos on our external election site, and we hosted a candidate forum which was streamed live, and the recording was placed on our external election site for future viewing. The forum had 355 people view the live stream and 1,651 YouTube replays. Attachment 1 in the report includes the top 10 cities with the highest voting participation, as well as additional voter demographics, including age group, gender, and participation by voting method. The total cost to conduct the 2019 retired member election was $1,354,782.76. The cost per vote received was approximately $11.38. That concludes my update on the 2019 retired member election. I would now like to move on to the review of the board election program, and this is where we're going to need you to take action.
You want to ask a question first? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So today's presentation will consist of reviewing our voting experience, trends, and costs over the last election cycle. We're going to be requesting the board's direction on 2 items as we prepare for the upcoming 2021 through 2024 election cycle. The 2 items are related to our ballot package and voting options moving forward. Here's a brief overview of our typical election cycle. An election cycle runs over a 4-year period. Elections are conducted in years 1 through 3. Year 4 is our off year, where we conduct an RFP to secure a board election services vendor and make administrative and regulatory updates as needed. This chart provides a quick breakdown of our last election cycle. Year 1 was our member-at-large election, which consists of our entire active and retired membership. Year 2 was our active member state, school, and public agency elections. These elections are ran simultaneously. Year 3 is our retired member election. So this slide is a breakdown of our actual voter turnout, total costs, and cost per vote by election. Please note that CalPERS did not conduct a state or school member election last cycle. Those positions ran unopposed. So this graph illustrates our voter turnout over the last 20 years. CalPERS has seen a steady decline in overall voter participation. Our member-at-large, public agency, and state elections had a voter turnout range of approximately 15 to 20% in the early 2000s and have declined since. Prior to our retired member election in 2019, our last election was held in 2007 with voter turnout at 32%. Last year's election came in at 19.7%. So based on the decline in voter participation, CalPERS introduced 2 additional voting methods beginning with our 2017 member-at-large election. Online and telephone voting were added to complement the paper ballot. The rationale behind the voting method enhancement was to increase accessibility to our members. Besides the paper ballot, members can vote online from their personal computer, smartphone, tablet, or by telephone. In addition to the multiple voting channels, our board election program changed its marketing efforts to raise overall voter awareness. Some of those efforts were online voting demonstrations at stakeholder forums and benefit education events, marketing partnerships with the top 10 largest public agency employers, candidate statement videos, toolkits for employers and retired associations, spotlight ads and banners on our Inside CalPERS page, press releases and social media posts, candidate forums, both in person, live stream, and on YouTube, and election reminder email blasts. So, we provided additional voting channels, and we revamped our marketing platform with the goal of increasing voter participation. The real question is, were we really able to move the needle? Outside of the 2019 retired member election, voter participation did remain low. 2 key observations were made over the last election cycle. Mail-in ballot continues to be our most popular voting method. And the second observation is that we did see a large increase in online voting preference in our active member 2018 public agency election. So if we turn our attention to costs associated with conducting our last election cycle, the paper ballot continues to be our most expensive voting channel at $4 million when you take into account the cost of paper, printing the ballot materials, and postage for the ballot package and prepaid return ballot envelope. The online and telephone voting methods were approximately $2.6 million over the same voting period. So we have looked at our voting experience by election, voting channel, the cost to run these elections, and our efforts to increase voter participation. How can we continue to improve our program? 2 cost-saving ideas we'd like to explore with you today that we think will hopefully increase voter participation are simplifying our ballot package and customizing our voting methods based on voter preference. So let's start with our ballot package. When our members currently receive their ballot package in the mail, they get a candidate statement booklet, which is approximately 8 to 10 pages. They get a ballot card with voting instructions and the customer contact information, personal identification number, and tear-off ballot, and they also receive a prepaid return envelope. What we would like to explore is moving to a one-page document, which is very similar to what CalSTRS provides in their election, that would provide voting instructions, customer service contact information, the web page to the candidate information, personal identification number, tear-off ballot for return, and a prepaid return envelope. Now, regardless of what decisions made today, we did want to tell you that we are moving to a security-tinted prepaid return envelope for our next election cycle. So why simplify the ballot package? We believe the benefits are it's an environmentally friendly ballot package. It's going to reduce complexity for voters, and there will be cost savings. The challenges would be that there's a modification to voter experience, regulatory amendments would be required, If we went with a simplified ballot package, there would be approximately $425,000 in savings based on the previous election costs. The second proposed change to our election process would be to tailor the voting methods offered by election type using voter preference from our last election cycle. This slide is a brief summary breaking out the election conducted and what voting methods our members used during that specific election. So the first option would be not to change our current menu of voting methods offered and continue to offer online, telephone, and the paper ballot for all elections. The benefits of that is that we have received positive feedback from our stakeholders. It's a secure and accessible experience, and no regulatory updates would be needed. The challenges would be we would continue to incur high costs, possible low voter turnout would continue, and it does require heavy reliance on enterprise support. If we stick with our current offering, the approximate cost for the next election cycle would be $8.5 million. Option B. This would be an option similar to all elections prior to 2017. This would be our program moving back to mail-in ballot only. The benefits of this would be it is our most popular voting stream. There would be a cost savings. The challenges would be that our active members are trending towards online voting preference. This option would not support our sustainability goals and reduction of paper. We could see a possible decrease in voter turnout, and regulation amendments would be required. If we moved back to our mail-in ballot, there would be approximately $3 million in savings based on the previous election costs. Option C, this would be to move to an online and telephone ballot only. The benefits of this would be active members are trending towards online voting. There would be an overall reduction in paper use and cost. The challenges would be this would be a modification to our voter experience. We could see a possible decrease in voter turnout, and regulation amendments would be required. If we went with only online and IVR, the approximate savings would be $2.1 million based on the previous election cycle. The next option is option D, which would allow us to move to a hybrid voting system. An example of a hybrid voting system would be to offer for our member at large election the mail-in ballot, online, and telephone. For state, school, and public agency, we would offer online and telephone voting only. And for the retired member election, we would offer the mail-in ballot only. The benefits of this would be we'd be tailoring the voting options to each voting community, and there would be cost savings. The challenges would be this would be a modification to our voter experience, and regulation amendments would be required. If we move to a hybrid voting system, there would be approximately $730,000 in overall savings based on the previous election cycle. So what's next for our board elections program? We will be releasing an RFP to secure a board election services vendor by this fall. In April, we will be returning to this committee and providing a regulation package. This package will include minor regulation changes and the decisions that are made today. These changes would be effective January 2021. After the award of the RFP, we'll be working on onboarding our board election services vendor and beginning to prepare for the 2021 member-at-large election. And that concludes my presentation, and we're available to answer any questions at this time. Thank you.
Certainly, it looks like you have a lot of questions. My question was, you said the total cost for this election, for the retired election, was $1.354 million?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Correct.
But you are also saying that if we stay with that option with all three availabilities of access to voting, it's normally costs $8.5 million?
If we had to run every single election in the election cycle, it would cost approximately $8.5 million.
Okay, so that's overall for all the
Correct.
all the elections. Okay,
Correct.
that's what I was trying to figure out. Okay, so Mr. Jones, hold on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to continue the current practice of our election processes. Looking at the historical voter turnout, it may suggest that if we had not had the electronic and phone, it may have even decreased more as opposed to increasing. So that's, I mean, looking at the data, it does suggest that there's a flattening of the reduction after you went to, and now we have about 22% of the last election that were members voted online or by phone, and so I don't want to remove any opportunity for our members to vote. So I would strongly suggest that we keep the current practice. Matter of fact, I'm thinking about adding information to the election process as opposed to decreasing. We just had a board evaluation where we talked about more transparency. And so by limiting the information to deleting all the information about a candidate is less transparent to me. I would like to also suggest 2 additional items to be added. One is that we have a board governance policy that requires each board member, after they're on the board, to certify that they have not had a financial negative condition over the last 5 years. So why not have that up front when they're running, have a statement in there whether or not they have been exposed to financial, such as bankruptcy and liens on property, et cetera. So, because that gives the member more information about that candidate. And I also would like to suggest that we add that any a certification that any potential member that has been convicted by a government body of sexual harassment, it be noted on that form also. So those are the 2 suggestions that I would suggest. And number 1, keep it as it is, but add more transparency rather than less going forward.
So let me get this right. So if we, for board direction, the first policy that you want is financial disclosure, like that it's disclosed on the ballot, or?
It could even be just a check mark.
Oh, hold on, I got you off, hold on. Where'd you go, Henry? Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I would defer to staff on how best to accomplish that goal, but it doesn't have to be, it could be just a certification that they have not had these financial difficulties. And if they were to say yes, then there should be a process of what the alert members are, what was involved in that situation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a vote, but I'm in support of option B, which is the mail-in ballot only. First of all, it has a cost savings of $2.6 million, probably more when you get the new contract for online and IVR services. It's the safest way to vote. You get a piece of paper, you turn it in, and it's completely auditable. My concern has always been that the online and telephone voting does not have an audit trail for the member, so they actually can't tell if their vote was counted. You could, I know you say it doesn't support our green policies, but use recycled paper, which probably will increase the cost, but use recycled paper, and that way you'll get there. But and also, you need to include the candidate statements. If you do not include the candidate statement in the packet, your voting percentage will decrease by somewhere between 30 and 50%. I tried to quickly look up a study I read. My degree is in poli-sci. I studied on data and polling, and I'll find that study for you. But if you do not include the information, people are going to open the ballot, say, who are these people? And most people read the candidate statements and choose based off those statements. They're not going to go, 80% of the voters are not going to go online and look to read the statement. They are just not going to vote, or they're going to make an uninformed vote. And we really don't want that for the pension board. So you need to include the statement. And I really just think we should save money and do a paper ballot. But no matter what you do, you need to include the same voting channels for all members. So if you're going to, if the committee is going to agree to do online and IVR, you need to do it for the retirees and for the all members. You can't have different voting channels for different groups. I don't think that's constitutional. Thank you.
Mr. Perez?
Thank you. I have a couple questions. First, the security tinted envelope that you referenced, is that more robust than the one we have now, or different than we have now, or that we have used in the past?
You will not be able to tell the vote by the voter in the envelope, holding up to light or just looking at it. So
Thank you.
it's a sleeve, correct?
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
And then for option B, you mentioned there'd be some regulation amendments. Can you specify, please?
Yeah, correct. In our retirement law, our PEARL, we have stated that online and IVR voting is permitted in our elections. So we would just have to if the decision was made by the board to go back to the paper ballot, we would have to revert back to most likely our older verbiage to prior to 2017 to allow us to administer the election in that manner.
But it's permitted, not shall include.
I'm sorry.
Does the PEARL say it's permitted, or does it say it shall include?
It shall include now.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I think it shall, sir, but I'd have to look at the PEARL.
You don't serve me.
I believe it shall.
That's fine. Just watch the news. Recent past has shown that online isn't secure. I prefer the mail-in ballots. It's good enough for the federal government, good enough for the state government. I think it should be good enough for us. You guys do a fantastic job of outreach and trying to get folks engaged. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And I don't see the benefit of getting that 22%, or that, even in my case, 34% of people using telephonic or online voting. I think the risk is greater than that. The juice isn't worth the squeeze on this, in my opinion. Also, I think it's important to include the candidate statement on that. And for mail-in ballots, on my CalPERS, I think I had to click or submit a box saying that I will allow direct mails. Is that the case for ballots?
No, so the ballot is an exception to that. So even if you opted out of having, going online and doing all your business with CalPERS online, we would still mail the ballot to each eligible voter.
Thank you. Yeah. And then lastly, to Mr. Jones's 2 points that he wanted to bring up. So right now, if we make sanctions against other board members, those are kept in closed session. And I have some heartburn with stuff that we deal with on attorney-client stuff to submit to the public. For the record, I'm clean on both. I'm good with my finances, and I haven't been alleged of harassment. But we have to be consistent in the way we handle those. That's it. That's on my notes. Thank you. Thank you for your hard work.
Ms. Yee?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. I'm not a member of the committee, and congratulations to you and Mr. Miller. I'm troubled by this conversation because it's all being framed within the context of cost savings, and I think it really should be framed within the context of improved voter participation. And from that perspective, and given kind of the context in which we're all operating in terms of voting methods, I guess I would concur with Ms. Brown and Mr. Perez that I think moving away from mail-in ballots is a real mistake at this point. And it really depends on what your objective is. If it's to save money, then you can make the case for the other methods. But if it's to enhance voter participation, and I will say 19% is not robust. We need to do better. And we're running the nation's largest pension fund, and we don't have robust participation by our members. That's, I think, a real stain on the system. And I would hope that if we are going to move into other methods, that there is a little bit more of a transparent process about identifying what those methods are, how they work, some of the drawbacks, robust stakeholder engagement around that. And I also agree that all the elections should be run consistently in terms of the methods used. So I would say, I mean, just on the heels of what we're seeing nationally with respect to just doubts around online voting and other types of voting methods, that I hope that we can stay with mail-in ballots and have as much information provided to the voters, voting members as much as possible, and then really have a robust public process about moving into the consideration of other methods.
Thank you, Ms. Yee. Mr. Rubalcava.
Thank you, and again, congratulations. Yes, a couple points. I noticed that IVR phone has the lowest participation, and I'm not very experienced with voting procedures, but I participate with many jurisdictions on the open enrollment for medical plans, and most of them have moved out of IVR because it's cumbersome and there's a lot of mistakes because there's always a confirmation and stuff. So I agree with many of the speakers that we want to enhance voting and participation, but we also want to be ensure that it facilitates it, not cumbersome, and it's accurate, of course. So. And at the same time, I think we should encourage new technologies, what have you, which is happening in the, again, I'm not sure if there's a good comparison, but I'm familiar with the open enrollment for medical, and online is becoming more and more popular. So I would suggest to allow people's choice in familiarity, well, they're familiar with, but to also enhance participation, that we stay with like a hybrid. We have both mail-in and online as options for the employee, for the member or and retiree. I also got some email saying that people are interested in having their candidate statement and perhaps not including the mailing for some people who have problems accessing it by online, may be cumbersome or a hardship. So I would favor two things, I guess. One, I don't think we need the IVR phone. I don't think it's. I don't think if people are participating, it's probably not growing. So I would suggest we don't need that, and we should allow the candidate statement to continue on the mailing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rubalcava. Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I concur with Controller Yee and some of my other colleagues about feeling the written statements are really valuable. For many of our voters, that's the only information they really get or have. It's also information that's constrained by some standards of content. I think our voters can legitimately trust that those candidate statements are not going to have demonstrably false statements. They're not going to have personal attacks. They're not going to have the kind of thing that if we don't have those statements and the only information they're getting is information that they're just hearing out in the world, I worry about that. I also feel, on the other hand, that having all options open for voting, while the percentages may not be high, we're talking about thousands of our members who voted with something other than a mail-in ballot. And sometimes that was because of the timing. They learned about the election or decided to vote or were spurred to action or lost their mail-in ballot or whatever, and at the last minute or later in the process, that was the way to vote for them that was convenient and would ensure that they could vote, and without it, they may not have voted. And that was a point that was brought up at the stakeholder forum the other day by an astute commenter, and it struck me as something I hadn't really considered a lot before, that the additional value of having those additional mechanisms and participation really needs to be our goal, not, cost savings is important, but in the grander scheme of things, as far as President Jones' comments about adding additional things, it's one thing to ask people to disclose proven wrongdoing or issues related to wrongdoing. But in my experience, a lot of people who have had financial problems and bankruptcies or have creditors chasing them may have done nothing wrong in their lives. They may have run afoul of the mortgage crisis. They may have had a family member or a spouse with medical conditions that sadly in this country can put you into bankruptcy or put you in financial distress or put you in arrears on taxes or whatever it may be. And so I would hope that if we do add something like that, which I'm not necessarily opposed to, we keep it to substantiated wrongdoing, something that would really reflect on the fitness of that person for this job, not necessarily something that could just be a result of the circumstances living in the US of A.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Ms. Oliveras.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. I wanted to follow up on Mr. Jones's and Mr. Miller's comments regarding the attestations. I think if we were going to look at 2 attestations, we might look at all attestations. So perhaps an attestation for no financial hardship, one for no substantiated claims of sexual harassment, but in addition, no conflicts of interest, and an attestation that confidentiality measures will be followed. So that way it's including, there may be more that we should include in there, but whatever the board is subject to, that be included in there and the attestation be made at that time. And then the second point I wanted to make, it was in deciding between the different options on the ballots. So for option A, in terms of for all the mail-in ballots, how many returned envelopes did we receive with an incorrect address notification?
I don't have that exact number, but we average between 1 to 1.5% return envelopes for bad addresses. I would also add, though, that we, as an organization, send out 2 mass mailers to all of our members twice a year, where we have received information from our post office saying that it could be an undeliverable, and we reach out to those members, prior to the election, just for typical business to have the most updated address on file for us.
And during the election, when we receive notification that the address is incorrect, do we take any measures?
Yes, so the envelopes do come back to us, and then we typically work with our customer service branch on those addresses, and then they get their file gets added to the names that are mailed when we send out that twice a year notification to update addresses. But if you're an active member employee, you do have to do it through your employer. Retired members would either go through the CalPERS portal, or they would work with our contact center or come into our regional office.
Are there any measures taken during the election process?
No, we don't. If we get an undeliverable back, our vendor stores those undeliverables until the end of the election, and we take no action at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Middleton.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank all of my colleagues for their comments. Unfortunately, we're in a time when public trust in institutions is as low as it has ever been. And I think we have to go the extra mile to make sure that in all of our elections that there is a trail that allows us to document what someone's voting intention was. Questions are going to emerge, and we need to have the ability to create a trail. But given that, I want to second the comments also of Ms. Yee. I think our primary goal needs to be to enhance the number of individuals who are participating in the selection. And one of the things that we have found in the public sector is giving individuals the opportunity to either vote by mail or to vote in person has increased voter participation. And if there are members who prefer to vote online, and we can find a way to track how they track a vote back, not to an individual, but can track it so as to be able to determine how many votes were for a particular individual. That is something we need to do. And I hope I got that sentence right.
I'm confused.
We need to be able to validate in some fashion not who voted for who, but how many votes there were for a particular individual. There has to be a documentation trail.
Right. All right. Thank you. Ms. Yee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I neglected to ask a question. In attachment 1, and it was in the staff report, we talked about the number of invalid ballots, and I know there was a good number of them that were invalid because they were late. But could you speak to some of the other reasons why we had like 2,900 invalid ballots?
Yeah, and an invalid ballot is a ballot that might have an over or under vote. So they voted for multiple people, or they did not select a candidate. There are also, in multiple cases, where the return envelope was opened and there was nothing in it, or another piece of paper outside of the ballot. Or if there was obviously no signature on the return envelope, it would be deemed invalid.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yee. I would like to say, Mr. Stone, thank you very much for this report. It was very helpful. Before we go on for voting on any of this, and we've got a whole lot of stuff to discuss still, it sounds like, because we've got some suggestions. I have people from the public that would like to talk and ask questions or talk. Mr. Darby, Mr. Behrens, Mr. Brennan, and Mr. Fontaine, if you'd come up.
Chair
yes.
Taylor, if I may interject just a comment at this point. With respect to the various suggestions about a disclosure requirement, I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention that there are serious legal issues with doing that.
Okay.
The California Constitution basically says, as of 1991, you cannot change the regulations or the qualifications for board members who are elected. That was part of the Proposition 162 that passed, kind of froze the selection process at that point. So quite arguably, the addition of a disclosure requirement would change the qualifications. Well, I should say, I left a little part out there. You can't change the qualifications without a vote of the electorate. So, because 162 was, of course, a vote of the electorate.
I got it.
So to add a specific disclosure requirements would potentially violate that provision. Very recently, we've seen this play out in a somewhat different context with the state requirement that was passed last year that said anybody to be listed on the California ballot for the President of the United States has to disclose his or her tax returns. And that was ruled by the California Supreme Court as violating the California Constitution, and also by a federal district court here in Sacramento as violating the U.S. Constitution. Again, I don't want to stress that's entirely the same case, because there were different policies at play and different provisions of the constitutions at play. But I just wanted to point out that before we get too far down that road, that there are substantial legal issues with doing that. So to be thrown into the mix as you consider that suggestion or those suggestions.
I do appreciate that. I was thinking that this might not be the venue for that. But I have a couple of comments from the board, and then we will get to you. Sorry. Ms. Olivares.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Thank you, Madam Chair. Would there be any obstacle to having voluntary disclosure?
No, in fact, as I recall the regulation now, it encourages certain types of disclosure, not necessarily the ones that the board members were talking about here today, but it encourages disclosure in your candidate statement, and that would certainly be permissible.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Jacobson, the regulations, I thought, provide for the board to develop processes for board members' election. So you're saying that if we develop within that authority, that still would be outside of our ability to include these kinds of...
You raised the counter argument, and it's a good one, which is, hey, these are just the regulations for the administration of board elections. So it's a fine line, but in my judgment, it tends to move over the line toward, if you're actually going to require, as opposed to what Ms. Oliveris just said of kind of urging or recommending a certain disclosure, if you're going to require them, then that kind of moves you potentially over the line toward changing the qualifications for a potential board member, and that would be a problem.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you. So I will move on to our public comments. And go ahead, Mr. Behrens, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Congratulations on your appointment. Members of the committee, Tim Behrens, the President of the California State Retirees. We are going on record today as supporting option A for many of the same reasons that the committee members and some of the board members that are visiting have put out there. We think that it's more important to try to increase the number of people that vote in the election. We recognize that the expense is important, and also recognize the fact that using my phone or my laptop may have some security issues, because it's hard to hack those paper ballots, but it's questionable about how bad the rest of the election process is. So we support all three continuing as they are. Hopefully our new cybersecurity here at CalPERS will overcome any issues related to use of phone and or laptop. We also believe that it's very important that the candidate statement continue to go out with the ballot. I was wondering, as I was listening to your conversation, whether or not we could put the candidate statements in the CalPERS perspective that goes out to every retired member in the state. I don't know if there's a time between the time the candidate statement would be final and the time people would receive that perspective, and whether or not that could take the place of putting it in the ballot and save a few bucks. I don't know. It's just an idea that popped in my head. So I would urge you to recommend to the board that we continue with option A. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Behrens. Mr. Darby.
Al Darby, President, Retired Public Employees Association. Congratulations to you and Mr. Miller for your re-election to the officer positions here. The important thing to remember here is that Internet and IVR are not secret ballots. There's a PIN number that's required, so you can identify who cast the ballot. That would not be the case, or is not the case, with paper ballots. Secondly, the options proposed to enhance CalPERS board election processes by adding internet and telephone will cause these elections to be about $3 million more than they need to be. And until you can come up with a secret ballot method to perform internet or IVR, it would appear to be an invalid way to conduct an election. Also, you have no paper trail of those votes, so you could have manipulation, and we have hacking from all over the world. Even China may want to hack into a CalPERS election. For all these elections, secret ballots are mandated outside in the outside world. So this is an anomaly, what we're doing here with IVR and internet voting. The two elections that we've conducted offering added non-secret ballot options have not significantly enhanced voter turnout. Voter turnout has declined even with those options available in the last two elections. In fact, all of the voting options offered here require a mailing of printed material, so you can't save much money on a mailing. All you'd be doing is suggested you take out candidate statements. So in all cases, option B would appear to be the best option at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Darby. Mr. Brennan and Mr. Fontaine.
Good morning. And congratulations again on the election for both of you that were elected. I'm Jerry Fontaine, Chief Financial Officer of California State Retirees. And the work that this board does is extremely important. So it's significant to have the members let you know what their beliefs are and what their feelings are. And I agree with Board Member Ms. Yee. It's more important to get members to vote than it is for the costs. Now, you have some costs that aren't important to track what's going on, like your cost per ballot return. That is a phantom figure, because if you allow a person to vote by phone or internet, then they're not going to return a paper ballot. So the cost per ballot return is going to be higher. So it's a phantom figure. So that should not be considered. The paper is the only way to go. You have approximately 30% of the retirees, I believe the figures are, that are at least 90 or 100 years of age. I'm willing to bet a significant amount of funds that they are not computer literate or don't want to be computer literate and don't understand computers because they're not in the computer culture. So going with at least a minimum of the paper ballot, I feel, is extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fontaine. Mr. Brennan?
Madam Chair and members, Terry Brennan on behalf of SEIU California. We've done a lot of research, SEIU has, with its members and its retirees about voting in CalPERS elections. And the two main reasons why they do not participate are, one, they don't know about the election. They threw away their ballot, didn't pay attention, don't know. So whatever we're doing about outreach and announcement, it's not enough. Two, they don't know enough about the candidates to choose. That was about 40 to 50% of the people who did not vote said, I didn't know enough to make a choice. So you have two proposals in front of you. One of them to restrict in one way or another access to voting, which seems counter to solving that problem. And the other is providing less information to the voters. We're going the wrong way. I mean, at a minimum, we're supporting option A. There is another option, option A1, which is you spend more money. You get more aggressive. You spend more time interacting with our members and our retirees about the upcoming election, about the importance of the election, about when the ballots are coming, about how to participate. And just to respond to the IVR issue, one of the biggest problems with that is that you call to get your PIN number, and you have to call another number to vote. You can't go, I'm ready to vote, press 1, and you're sent to the voting site. So you've now created another obstacle to voting. If we could change that part, we could increase IVR. It's doubled by your numbers from the initial in 2017, which was the first time you did it, to 2019 with the retirees, to almost 5% of the vote, from something like 2.48 or 58 in December, or in 2017. And in terms of the online, I mean, 34% of the people who voted in the public agency election voted that way. I'd like to take a little credit for it. We had a very aggressive online program because people in those situations feel comfortable doing it. So I want to discourage anything that limits your options to voting and limits your options to information. Politics is messy. Politics, democracy is expensive. We just got to figure out a way to do it better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. So I had a couple of questions that came up from our commentary here, Mr. Stone. The PIN number that we're using for the online, and that's for, does that identify the actual voter, or is that just a PIN number to get in?
So each eligible voter is provided a unique identification number. That's just a random number that we provide. When you access the landing page, you then are required to put in your last four of your social, your PIN, to enter the voting portal. After that, the vote is completely separated, how you vote and what's logged. All we really care about is we know that that voter went in at that time online and casted a vote. That way we can ensure that only one vote was casted per eligible voter.
Okay.
And that has happened on occasion where, you know, someone is confused, they're trying to log back in, it's not allowing them to log back in. They call our help desk provided by the vendor. That vendor then is able to look at their account and identify you logged in at 10:38 a.m. on Saturday and you did submit a vote, and sure enough, they recall doing that.
Okay. So basically it's to prevent double voting.
Correct.
But otherwise, it's separate from, and
The
there
voter-
isn't a way for the vendor to go back and say, hey, this ID, this PIN ID was from Teresa Taylor.
Correct. The
Okay.
vote and the voter is disassociated.
And then my second question was on the internet votes. I know we've talked about this before. Is there a paper trail that can be created?
So the vendor handles this entire election, right? CalPERS does not. And they are required to have auditable trails.
Okay.
And they're not audits performed by CalPERS, but CalPERS can request an audit of the election. And a third party would then have to come in and do an audit of their election process.
So they have some kind of trail.
Yes, and it's certified by Secretary of State, and they have, let me see where that one, right here. In the frequently asked questions that we provided to all of our members, it talks about, I have the wrong page, sorry. Here we go. It uses enterprise-grade hardware and encrypted security procedures housed in a highly secure and accredited data center facilities, and that they have received accreditations from the United States Department of Defense. They follow guidelines of encryption, threat modeling, physical server security, and tamper detection monitoring.
Okay. I saw Ms. Frost step up. Did you want to okay. Okay, so those were my questions I had. Before we go forward with some of the direction here, I got one more question from the committee, or outside the committee, but a board member, Margaret Brown.
Thank you. Ms. Malm, just to go back over, when you say that they're certified by the Secretary of State, I know that the print shop is certified to print ballots, but are you telling me that the online company is certified by the Secretary of State to do online voting? Because I don't think
Secretary of State does not certify online voting.
Right. I just want to be clear. So it's just to print the ballots. It's not to.
And their facility is evaluated every 2 years.
Right.
They just got their accreditation, right?
But the Secretary of State of California does not certify any online voting.
Except for ours. They certify our vote, our elections.
They're not certified to do online voting.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay.
If I could take a swing at the candidate statements, maybe. So here's the one page that is currently used that only has basically the instructions and the ballot. And then this is our ballot package. And as you can see, it's folded, stapled, numerous pages. So, and blank pages, because it's in a booklet form. And so I agree that the candidate statements are valuable information. I certainly like Mr. Barron's comment about putting in the perspective. But what if there was a secondary page that was like this as opposed to a booklet, and it had like the candidate statement on the top half, second candidate statement on the bottom half. It's still a lot easier, cheaper to print as opposed to going all the way back to the booklet. That's just a consideration for you guys to think about.
Okay, great. So, and I will say that does make sense. So if we have more than one candidate, then you can just have it on both sides, right? Okay. That makes sense then, rather than having a booklet. I get the booklet looks more officious because they do it for Sacramento County and every place else. I do have questions from the board members. Mr. Saha from Ms. Ma.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two quick questions. Are there any issues, historically speaking, with security issues related to the online or the phone voting?
None.
Okay. And a question about, I know one of the options might be not providing all the voting options to all members. I believe it's option D. Is there any issue constitutionally with that option? Maybe it's a question for Matt, I guess.
For D?
Yeah, for D.
D is just the hybrid voting option, so maybe only offering paper for retired, offering online and IVR for...
It's not clear. It's a good question. I think that if there were sufficient rationale for the distinction, that would probably be fine. That would have to be more fully articulated than it has been yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
But it would require a regulatory change because the current regulation requires all three voting methods.
Right. Okay.
And just to answer your question, Mr. Perez, the actual regulations, section 554.7 of the California Code of Regulations says that CalPERS will allow online and telephone voting on there. Yep.
All right. Mr. Fechner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Unless I'm mistaken, although I agree with Mr. Barron's comment, I don't think the regulations allow us to do any advertising for campaigns or political information in the perspective, correct?
You are correct, Mr. Fechner.
So basically, let's restate that. We cannot put the candidate statement in the CalPERS perspective. However, there are other discussions about how we can do that. So I just wanted to have that restated. And I'm being asked, Mr. Miller, please, everyone speak into your microphones. Go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Okay. One thing that strikes me as one of the kind of challenges to some of these is that they require regulations, and they would be subject to being opposed and potential legal challenges. But the thing I really wanted to come back to was this idea of that we could potentially put, if there were only two candidates, we could have something back to back and save that blank piece of paper by using that. As long as we have the opportunity for those candidate statements to be delivered to our members, I think that would be fine. But this isn't my first rodeo. I've been running for CalPERS board, since somewhere around 2001, I believe, the first time. And I remember being at a couple candidate forums with a lot of other candidates. And so I don't know that necessarily would minimize or change make a big difference in putting together a package if we had a contested election with multiple candidates. But I just do want to reiterate, and having run for the board a number of times going way back, and having seen the concerns, the questions, the perceptions, the distrust of our election processes and changes, and why changes have been made over time during the course of various election cycles, especially the perception that things were being done to benefit incumbents, which you wouldn't think I'd be complaining about, but I'm acutely sensitive to that perception. And so I also think, at least for myself, I also don't want to contribute to that perception that I would be kind of self-dealing as a potential future candidate by making changes that would, again, limit information going directly to our members that would potentially benefit me as an incumbent. So I'm more inclined to stay with the status quo, or in fact, actually beef up our efforts going forward, as suggested by others.
Before I move on to the next speaker, I just had one other comment that Mr. Miller's comments reminded me of. We have, we spend time and money notifying people of the election, right? And I see that we have engagement with the 10 largest agencies. So how people don't know is, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the response is when you engage with those 10 large agencies. Could you give us kind of an idea?
Mr. Stone contacted each one of them himself, so I'm going to let him talk about it.
Positive. I would make contact with each agency and work with their public affairs director or information officer. Our public affairs team has done a fantastic job actually creating marketing toolkits. It's a kit that we send out to all of our interested stakeholders, all of our public agencies, or whoever's voting that election, as well as our retired and labor associations. And it's a one-stop shop with regards to newsletter help or email blasts. And, unfortunately, we just haven't seen the traction, we thought we would.
Okay, so is Franchise Tax Board on that as one of the 10 large agencies?
There was no state election this last election cycle or school.
So this is the first time you've done
I personally called the top 10 public agency elections in 2018 and worked with their information officer on the toolkit and marketing.
And we
the
haven't done that
elections.
before for any of the other. Okay, so maybe we'll see it move forward, because I was going to say, if you did that before, I don't think anybody ever heard about it from my agency. But so we have to know whether or not that got disseminated as maybe a follow-up. Because they can say that they will and they get busy and it's not on the top of their radar, and maybe they didn't disseminate that information. So that would be something we can talk about as well. Mr. Perez.
I got thoroughly confused in regards to the certification process from the Secretary of State, from whoever certifies here in California. Can you?
So Integrity Voting Systems, who was our administrator of the election, they have to go through a certificated process with the Secretary of State with regards to them being an authorized ballot printer, as well as printing those ballots that can be read on authorized election machines. So they are audited every 2 years to get that accreditation, and they've had that for several years, and I think they were just reaccredited.
Okay.
So I think it was what you were talking about, which was the online voting is not accredited by the Secretary of State directly. The entire vote is accredited by the Secretary of State. Is that correct?
Correct. The election is certified by the Secretary of State.
The whole election?
The entire election.
But online and IVR voting is not certified by Secretary of State, correct?
No, it's not a method that they utilize.
Yeah, all right.
So do those votes, do the members that use that system, do those votes count?
Yes.
Yes, the election is certified, including all of the votes, by the Secretary of State. Even though they don't recognize or utilize online and telephone voting, they do recognize and certify our elections.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have some decisions here. From the chair's point, it sounds like we still want candidate statements. Maybe you guys can bring us a copy of a state election that would have multi. So it'd be two people running at the same time that would maybe have 4 candidate statements, 4 or 5 candidate statements. So if you're doing it on a sheet of paper or a couple of sheets of paper rather than a booklet, and bring the booklet kind of sample or show us something like that. But it sounds to me, if I'm hearing the committee correctly, that we want more information, not less information. Okay. Now, here's the voting part. Okay, we have options A, B, C, and D. So I'm going to, who wants to vote for option D? Does anybody have an appetite for option D? Because I didn't hear a lot of appetite for that. So, anybody? So I'm going over the options now, Stacy, I'm sorry. It didn't sound to me like anybody had an appetite for option D. So I'm actually trying to get rid of options now as we move into voting for this. So does anybody have a problem with us not going for option D? Okay. Then option C was online and IVR only. Did anybody have an appetite to see that one? It's looking like no. Okay, so we're going to get rid of C and D. Option B is return to mail-in ballot only. Okay, so we do have a bit of an appetite for that in the committee. It looks like I have one person. So I'm going to ask for everybody who's in favor of option B to hold up their hand on the committee. It looks like I got one person. Okay. So we don't have an option B viable vote here. So we do have a viable vote. I take it for option A is where we're at, which is staying the status quo. So now I need a vote on continuing with option A. So all of those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. I need a motion for option.
I move that we adopt option A to continue.
Okay, so it's been moved by Mr. Jones, seconded by Mr. Miller. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Oh, we have two discussions. I'm sorry. Mr. Perez.
I was going to ask for a substitute. I don't know how it works.
A substitute motion?
Yeah, that one.
That one?
To approve number B, letter B. I don't think the raising hand cuts it.
Okay, so you're asking us to go back to option B and ask for a vote?
Yeah.
Okay, I can do that.
Just to clean it up.
Fine.
Mr. Perez is making a motion. He needs a second to his motion, and then you can take the vote.
So we're asking to go back. We have a motion to go back. I guess it's a substitute motion to option B and take a vote on option B. I need a second. So it fails for no second. Mr. Rubalcava?
Thank you. I would support option A, but I was persuaded by Mr. Terry Brennan's testimony. I think we need to see if we can improve the IVR process. Thank you.
Certainly. I don't know what that entails. But
so it wouldn't be the double calling in like
so instead, if there's
Simplify
a way to, and that would come with the RFP, you can kind of put those parameters in the RFP, right?
Yeah, we've gone through about 3 iterations of our flow chart, and we've gotten a lot better with the voting experience using IVR. We would just work with our vendor on adding an option if they call our help desk line for help, that we can get them transferred from there directly to the voting portal via IVR.
So that's the problem. So our initial phone call, I think Mr. Brennan's gone. The initial phone call to get our PIN number, if we don't have it with us, to vote online or to vote via IVR is to our help desk. Is that what I'm hearing?
Chair Taylor, when a member has lost their PIN and they call into the IVR, Mr. Brennan's point was that there was not the ability to transfer that person directly into the voting system, that they had to make a separate call. That was changed during the retiree election. So
that was changed?
It was changed in the retiree election.
So that's already been done.
We will make sure that we change it in the documentation so it's very clear.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. Mr. Jones.
After you vote on this, I have a comment.
All right. So I think we were had a motion and a second for option A. All those in favor of option A, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? I have one nay. So,
I oppose.
You got it.
Please show that Mr. Perez is a no vote. Any abstentions? All right. Motion carries. We are option A. and streamlining. We still want the candidate statement, but streamline it as best as possible. And Mr. Jones.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would ask if you could direct staff to also explore the optional attestation provisions of the process.
So I think that's a two-parter. So then we'll need Mr. Jacobs to look into whether or not that's actually constitutional.
Yeah, he said
I can tell you right now, if you want to make something optional, you can do it.
Right.
So how would that work? I don't
I
understand
think
how
the
that.
question would be, what do you want to direct staff to include in the voter? Well, no. I guess this would be in the regulation. It'd be a change to the regulation, because the regulation says what should be included in the candidate statement, right? So it would be a direction to, Ms. Maum is speaking, so I'm going to defer to her. She's got a better idea how to do this than I do.
Do you? She's like,
No, I don't have a better idea than
Okay,
Joe
well, then I'll
Hansel.
continue.
Sorry. I was giving him an idea. We're bringing back regulations in April, and so we can work with the legal counsel to look at optional language, and then it goes to you, and it goes to the public comment to get input on what sticks.
And
Okay.
if it's optional, am I understanding this correctly, that doesn't necessarily mean they have to disclose this? It's just an
Correct.
option, correct?
Correct.
So it's not changing the way.
It's not changing the qualifications
Right.
to run for office.
Right.
It's an encouragement
To be honest.
disclose certain things.
It's kind of like, gee, we really want the president's tax returns, but
Exactly.
I gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I think that before April, though, it would be useful. There were a number of things that were proposed to get an idea of whether there's a coalescence around a few, 2 or 3 or 4 of them, so that staff can put drafts of those into a proposed regulation. So what I heard was financial defalcations, which is too vague, so we should probably say something more specific there, something about sexual harassment findings by government agencies, and then I think there were some others.
It was
Conflict of interest
Conflict
and
of interest.
confidentiality.
Yeah, and confidentiality,
Right.
sexual
So I think
harassment, and financial.
That's everything that we heard. So I think we can put those into a draft regulation, bring it back, and the committee can vote on which of those makes the grade. Does that
I
make
got it.
sense?
Yeah. All right,
Does that
thank
work?
you. Thank you. So we are finally done with 7B. Thank you very much. We are moving on to 7C, item 7C, revised proposed regulation for the Social Security Administration fees.
Let me have Renee Ostrander walk you through proposed changes in regulations. You have seen these regulations before, but let me turn it over to Renee.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Renee Ostrander, CalPERS team member. I'm here today to present Agenda Item 7C, the revised proposed regulations for the Social Security Administration fees. We're requesting approval to submit the revised regulations for a 15-day comment period, and if no comments are received, submit those revised regulations to the Office of Administrative Law for review and publication. As you may recall, the regulations were first brought forward to you in September. The regulations identify the calculation of fees to support CalPERS' administration of the state Social Security program. After that time, we released the proposed comments for a 45-day public comment period. We did receive one comment, and the information related to that comment is in your agenda item. Since that time, we've had the opportunity to receive new data and complete additional analysis and discussion, and as a result of that, we are requesting to make a revision to the calculation of the adjustment of fees on an annual basis. And this adjustment will align with the requirement that we stay within the annual fund balance that has been set by statute and provides for more minor adjustments in the calculation. We'd be moving away from utilizing the CPIU and instead adjusting based on the actual fund balance. If approved today, we'll release the proposed regulations for a 15-day public comment period to the public to comment on the revised language only. If no comments are received, we'll submit the revised language to the Office of Administrative Law for their review, approval, and then the publication by the Secretary of State. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Sure. So thank you. So basically, as I understand it, this change is that you would like to be able to not come before the committee every year and ask for additional funds.
Correct.
Okay.
It was already in there to not do that because it is a pretty lengthy process to be adjusting them. So we had originally built it in with CPIU, but over concerns over new data that we had available to us, there were concerns that we might go over our fund balance. So we've adjusted how we'll do those adjustments annually.
So can you give me so it's not CPIU, how are you doing it now?
So now we're going to be looking at the actual fund balance, so it's related to our annual program expenditures for the upcoming year, and then where our actual fund balance is in terms of billing and collection. And so we put all of that information together and then calculate what the adjustment in the request, the invoices that would go out.
Okay. So then I had a request that I had spoken to Mr. Cohen about, and just to make sure, since if we're not seeing this come forward, and we can see it in the budget, correct?
Yes, we'd be happy to put the proposed fee amount in the April budget proposal on an annual basis.
And then
so that
just
everyone could see.
If you could report that out.
Yes,
just
everyone
as
could
an
see what
additional-
the fund balance is and what the proposed fee would be for the upcoming fiscal year. Absolutely.
Okay, great. And then I had, that sounds all wonderful. I appreciate your help on that. Ms. Brown.
Thank you. I was on the committee when this first came, and I had asked for a copy of that calculation and the certification of that calculation because it originally was not included in our packet. So my question was, and it looked like when you looked at the calculation that we could have 150% of the required fees in the fund balance at some point in time. So, so this new regulation is going to, we're going to do more math. We're going to do more work to get the number closer to what it needs to be, not less than 50 and not greater than 100.
Correct.
Okay, so that way we are not harming the employers who have to pay this.
Correct.
Okay.
The anticipation is to stay between 50 and 100% because 50% gives us about a 6-month, window or cushion for the annual fees.
So did we figure this out, or did somebody tell us that we were going to be collecting probably too much and we needed to change
We
it?
figured this out based on some new data that we started collecting. I mean, everything for us in the beginning was an estimate, so we were doing our best with that. We've started collecting actual data, and so based on that data and based on new information we received, we did this recalculation.
Well, I'm glad that we discovered this issue and that it's important that we don't over-collect on the fees. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Thank you. So given this, I have no other questions from the committee. Given this is an action item, can I get a motion for the revised proposed regulation for It's moved by Mr. Miller. Second by Mr. Jones. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. 7C, we're on 7D.
Thank you.
And that's the Barra LLC contract.
That's right. Let me have Dan from our investment office quickly describe this item. It's basically asking for a contract extension that exceeds our current delegated authority.
Thanks, Michael. Dan Bienvenu, Acting Chief Operating Investment Officer. Yes, management is requesting a 2-year contract extension for the BARA contract. The rationale for our request is that we currently have a handful of technology projects in flight, specifically the data strategy and our multi-asset trading platform project in flight. The risk management platform, which BARA serves as, is closely intersected with those. We would like to progress those a bit further before we make a final determination on our risk platform. But to get to that point, we need an extension of the contract. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Do I have any questions on this? I do. Bless you. Ms. Oliveras.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What's the current cost of the system?
That's about $2.5 million a year.
So the cost hasn't increased at all?
As a result of this extension?
Yes.
Correct.
How many users?
I don't know that off the top of my head. It would be the whole risk team, money of the total fund portfolio management team. There would be definitely tens.
So it's primarily the investment office that accesses it, or only the investment office?
I believe it's only the investment office that has access.
Will the board have access so that we can look at this and understand the risk?
The board certainly has access to the reporting that comes out of it. That's what you see monthly. That's the stuff that is now populated in Insight. All of that is stuff that the board would have access to the reporting, absolutely.
Will we have access to this service so that we can see this dynamically and not just on every investment meeting?
That is not the current practice of having board members have direct access into those systems. It's more the output that we're providing to you in your oversight role, but we're happy to have a further conversation about it.
What would the additional cost be to add the board members?
We would have to look at it. I don't know if this is an enterprise license or a user license, so we'd have to take a look at that.
So we don't know that right now whether or not it's enterprise or user based?
I do not. I don't know if Dan does.
I believe it's an enterprise. It's a site-wide license, I believe, but I'd have to confirm that.
I'd like to know if there are any additional costs for adding the board members so that we can understand the investment risks on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, like I said, we're happy to meet with you on that. And some of the reporting, if the reporting is not generating the transparency that you need around risk, we're happy to customize other reports that will come out of the system as well.
So our role is oversight?
Yes.
And I believe that we're looking to ask for that kind of access, might be looking at going down further than our actual oversight.
My understanding that other trustees, such as Lucera, has access to several types of investment
Would they have a
databases.
different investment office than we do?
Right, but many other public pension funds have similar types of access.
And,
So I just wanna make sure
and
that-
let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Ms. Yee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the 2-year extension, will we then see within this period of time the full implementation of the multi-asset trading platform?
We hope so. We certainly will have the answer. The current contract expires in November of 2020. We believe that around that time is where we'll be at a decision point, and then we can move forward. The challenge would be that if we move to a decision point that goes a different direction, now we would have an expiring contract, and that puts us in a tougher situation. So this just buys us a couple of years to make sure that we progress the other technology projects.
Okay. And then is this extension period also, I guess, encompassing a test period so that we know what may be required in terms of the RFI for future risk platform services? So
It would. So currently on the multi-asset trading platform specifically, we did a test system. We confirmed that worked, but we had some reservations about it. It's workable, but not perfect. We're doing another test of a different potential. And then once we work our way through those 2 sets of tests, we should be approaching a decision point. And we'll have also progressed the data strategy, which also, again, sort of intersects with this.
okay. Can I just ask for maybe some periodic updates with respect to the implementation
Absolutely.
process? Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, it appears I don't have any more questions. I had one more question. When we extend contracts for IT, I always have a little hesitancy because IT projects in the state of California tend to be a problem. So I just want to make sure, as Ms. Yee was asking, that the cost is staying the same, but also that we don't foresee this being used over and over and over again. And is there, once this risk platform is active, is there knowledge transfer?
So the risk platform is currently active, and there has been knowledge transfer, and there continues to be knowledge transfer. I would say that if we were to go in a new risk platform, then that would also be the case. That would be part of that decision calculus. And yes, I share your concern around technology projects going too long. That's something that we are certainly pushing on. That's the reason for a 2-year extension, and it's only on a contract that's existing in place while these other technology projects progress. And
as I see that, then I kind of expect if we have to do this again, then I would expect that you guys have vetted what they've done, right? To see, well, do we really need an extension, or is this just trying to get more money out of the state of California?
We need a platform. We know we need that for sure. What we don't know is if through doing some of these other things, if we can actually save some money on that platform on a go-forward basis. We don't have enough information yet to be able to make that decision. And that's the reason to extend to this contract for 2 years to progress the other things to see if we can get to that place of potential savings.
Hopefully. All right, great. I have no other questions, so this also is an action item. I'd like to have someone move it. So it's moved by Mr. Jones. I need second by Mr. Miller to approve the recommendation for a 2-year contract extension on Barra LLC contract. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Oh, you said, I have an abstention by Ms. Oliveras. All right, motion carries. And now we are on 8A.
Yes, that concludes your action items for the agenda. Moving on to informational items, we have our annual diversity and inclusion report, where I'll turn it over to our communications and investment team to walk you through the PowerPoint.
Hi, guys. Everybody look.
Good morning. The setup there was purposeful. So we have our report here, our annual diversity and inclusion report. So this comes out of the Stakeholder Relations Division. So I'll be giving this report, as well as being accompanied by Samiso here to talk about the investment component. And if there are any other questions that come up, we can have our subject matter experts come in and answer some of your questions if you have them. So we'll follow the slide presentation here. So next slide. So the focus on D&I is the increased engagement of our leaders and team members. Well, first of all, let me step back 1 second here and say that our CalPERS Diversity Outreach Program, we have 3 practitioners and a manager, and then we have our supervisors. They're in the audience here, so I'd like to recognize them for their strong work, and you'll see as a result of the report here, they put this together for us. So if they could just stand up and be recognized. There they are, right here. So this is our 4th year of expanding the D&I business initiative, and we're trying to direct our efforts to increase the engagement of the leaders, team members, expand training to raise awareness and understanding of diversity and inclusion, and most importantly, help our leaders to integrate these best practices within our teams. So next slide, please. So our diversity strategy has 3 focus areas: talent management, which is connecting D&I and talent management efforts to attract, develop, and advance highly qualified team members. Our education component, to expand and strengthen D&I education to increase inclusion and engagement across the enterprise. And our communication, where we leverage our communication channels to present a consistent message, increase team member involvement, and showcase CalPERS as a destination employer. Next slide, please. So in measuring our success, our methodology here, you can see that in 2016, we established a new measure through the employee engagement surveys questions specific to our diversity and inclusion. The target goal is to increase our engagement score by 8% by the year 2022, requiring an annual target over the 5 years of 1.6% increase per year. Next slide. Okay, our accomplishments. So far, in 2018-19, we continued to implement the D&I, enterprise D&I strategy to increase collaboration, communication, and engagement across the enterprise. We have established an Enterprise Diversity and Inclusion Council to support CalPERS strategic goals and tactical initiatives, slated to commence its first meeting this March. Having increased the D&I strategy measure by 1% in fiscal year 2018-19, our total increase since the initiation of the business initiative is over 6%. We are on target to raise our engagement by the 8% target by 2022. The number of requests for workshops and presentations has increased by 41%, and our team has conducted workshops and presentations to over 40 teams, including our Senior Leadership Council, serving 10 separate divisions and over 360 participants. Senior leader engagement increased with employee resource group efforts. And those employee resource groups are diversity and inclusion, our disability advisory committee, as well as our CalPERS diversity and inclusion group. Those are employee generated and employee participated employee resource groups. Next slide, please. So here we'll just kind of walk through some numbers here. You can take a look at those. They're pretty self-explanatory here. I don't need to go ahead and label all of these, but you can see from the pie chart there our ethnicity across the enterprise with this particular slide. Next slide, we will talk about our gender demographics. You can see broken down into the executive, senior leader, rank and file, and team leader components. And then our gender by branch. These branches are throughout our enterprise. And you can see there, they're all listed appropriately there. And then the next slide, our ethnicity of our team members. Again, all the numbers are fairly self-explanatory. And then the ethnicity of our senior leaders. And senior leaders, division chiefs and up. And then our ethnicity of team leaders. And this would be our management level. And then our ethnicity by program area. So for the next two slides, I'd like to introduce you to Samiso Nzima, and he'll go over these from the investment office and speak about our efforts on our corporate board diversity.
Thank you. Members of the Finance and Admin Committee, good morning. Samiso Nzima, CalPERS staff. So corporate board diversity is one of the 6 strategic priorities that were adopted by the Investment Committee in August 2016. And my team really has been responsible in terms of engaging companies and trying to get them to increase the number of diverse board members. We're making progress. It's slow. I think some board members were here a year and a half ago. They heard me say that it's akin to trying to boil the ocean in terms of trying to improve the diversity on our boards. But if we look at the companies that we've engaged since 2017, 53% of those companies have actually added an element of diversity that they didn't have at the beginning of our engagements in July 2017. One of the KPIs of the strategic plan was to have all S&P companies have at least a woman on their board after 3 years, and that was achieved by July 2019. So all S&P companies at least have gender diversity. And again, want to emphasize the fact that we use gender as a criterion, but when we engage companies, we actually look at all forms of diversity. And the reason, again, we use gender as a criterion is that we don't have the data in terms of race, ethnicity, and the other forms of diversity. So the disclosures are not there because they're not mandated and so forth. Where our engagement have not been successful, we've actually been voting against, directors, board chairs, nominating and governance committee members, and so forth. So the numbers you can see there, we actually voted against quite a number of directors, although the numbers are coming down, which is really a reflection of the fact that the message is getting across. So we're getting more companies adding diverse candidates or diverse members to their board. So those numbers I would expect to see them to continue to come down over time, at least where we're voting against directors, and also filing shareholder proposals. Moving on to the next slide. This is really just a graphical illustration of the cumulative effect. So just to show you that when we started this, the fiscal 2017-18, we had identified 504 companies, and 151 companies had actually added, diverse directors to their board. And then fiscal 2018-19, we identified an additional 178 companies, taking the cumulative number to 682 companies, and cumulatively 361 companies have added diverse director to their board. So that's the 53% there. So you're seeing that increase. Before I hand back to my colleague, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about 3D, which is the diverse director data source. This is a data source or database which was founded by CalPERS at CalSTARS. When we're engaging companies, we had a lot of companies saying that they could not find qualified diverse candidates. And so as part of this initiative, we worked to co-found 3D, and in 2016 we moved that to the Equila Diversity Network platform because they have it over there, and the Equila Diversity Network has 20 partner members. By partner members, these are different affinity groups, like Latino Corporate Directors Association, Black Enterprise, Ascend, Catalyst. There's about 24 affinity groups. And again, this is an idea that you want to see when companies are saying they can't find qualified director candidates, they can go to some of these, the Equila Diversity Network. But just to give you statistics in terms of 3D, in terms of the number of candidates that are on 3D right now, we have about 814 candidates. And on the broader Equila Diversity Network, we have about 2,800 candidates. In terms of the number of board appointments from 3D, from January 2017 to the end of 2019, we had about 300 directors appointed to company boards, but 100 of which are into public company boards, and then the other 200 they're from into private on non-profit boards. And from the Equila Diversity Network, with about 1,000 directors appointed between 2017 to 2019. There's a board appointment. The actual number of director appointments, 189 in 3D and 727 in EDN. So really, there's some directors were appointed to two or three boards. So again, talking about the issue of whether companies are appointing the same people, to multiple boards, but it shows that the numbers they're actually appointing, there's no overboarding here as a result of this. And one last statistic that I would like to leave the board with on this, the Finance and Admin Committee on this, is that if you look at the level of diversity on the Russell 3000, for example, in January 2017, you had 15% of board seats occupied by women, and by the third quarter of 2019, that number moved to 21%. So that's that's a 6 percentage point increase, which is a 40% increase in the number of board seats occupied by women on the Russell 3000. So again, like I said, it's a slow move, but we're, I believe we're making progress. I'll hand back to my colleague.
Okay, so we'll finish up our comments here and then open it up to questions. I didn't mean to slide over the generational slide. I got past it there, but all those numbers are fairly self-explanatory as well. We're losing boomers and bringing in Gen Xers as we go along. So, and I'm okay with the term "okay boomer." It works for me too. So, all right. So the next steps and update. We're on track to increase our goal of 8% by 2022. The launching of the Enterprise Council for the D&I initiatives, working together as an enterprise, no segregation between our enterprise and then the investment team. Working closely with them has been beneficial for the organization and for the enterprise, as well as for all of us that are involved in that process. The investment team continuing to do their work to engage companies, as Samiso just shared with you, and we'll leave it open for any questions that you may have for us.
Well, thank you both for that great report. And I think our diversity is looking better. Yay. I did want to ask Samiso about our corporate board directors from Equilar and our 3D database. I think it was Richard Costigan that had asked for us to break these numbers out. But you talked about having the same people on several different boards. I'm wondering if we could have that number in the future, rather than just saying, well, we had this many total and some of them are doing double duty on other boards. It just gives us an idea of how many we're actually placing, and then, then we have them being placed on. I suppose it's helpful that they are diverse candidates, but if they're serving on the same or different boards, same person, it really isn't expanding the diversity.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. So the numbers, so for example, for 3D, the 300 board appointments went to about 200 board candidates. So really it's not an overboarding issue. And as part of our proxy voting, the principles, we actually vote against directors who sit on more than 4 public company boards. So really we have that, we can look at that from the principles version, and I can assure you that we don't vote against that many number of diverse candidates, and it's not because we give them preferential treatment, it's because they don't trip the more than 4 boards, in terms of sitting on more than 4 boards. So it's the numbers, I don't think there's that, the number of overboarding or having the same candidates appointed to too many boards is not that high, in our view, at least from our experience.
It's not what? I'm sorry?
It's not that high.
It's not that high? Well, 100's high. That's a third. If you're saying 200 were...
So 200 candidates appointed to 300 board seats. That's what, 1.5
right.
per person. So
it's basically a third of them, 100 of them are serving on more than one board.
Yes, but our principles, we say no more than 4 public boards. So if you don't go beyond 4 public boards, if you are not an executive of a company, then we actually don't vote against you. So in terms of we have an overboarding policy in terms of what we think is too many boards for one candidate, and that number is 4. So
and we decided that how?
This is something which I think we've moved from, it used to be 6, I think, or 5, and then we've actually moved it down to 4. So each year we actually look at this, and as we interact with companies, as we see how the complexity of running and understanding businesses is, we're always revising that number and looking at it again to see how many boards are too much.
Okay.
And the advantage of actually sitting on multiple boards is that you can learn from what's happening on other boards. It's just that it cannot be overburdening. It's overburdening so that you are not able to perform your duties. And we've talked to some directors during our engagements, just in terms of trying to understand how many hours they're required to, for people to actually spend in terms of attending board meetings and understanding and stuff like that. And it seems 4 is in terms of the maximum number of boards, 4 is a reasonable number, given the time that's required to spend understanding the business and actually contributing effectively.
Okay, so in addition then, as we're moving forward and we're doing the proxy voting, when do we move into more diverse candidates? I mean, it seems like it's been hard enough to get women. So when do we move into an expectation of more diverse candidates racially?
I think the challenge there is that unless you have mandatory disclosures, that information really, I mean, even right now, when you look at the Equila platform, they're asking people to voluntarily disclose. And we try to look at those numbers even for our own appointments from 3D. The bulk of those appointments, I think it's about 80%, they don't disclose. So it's really hard until you have that as mandatory disclosures, or you have enough companies actually disclosing voluntarily. And that was part of the reason why, as part of the Human Capital Management Coalition, which we co-founded in 2017, we filed a petition with the SSC in terms of improving human capital disclosure to include, not just gender, but race, ethnicity, and so forth.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a whole lot of questions here, so Ms. Yee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to just applaud CalPERS for its leadership with respect to moving the needle on corporate board diversity. I think the engagements that we've long been, just really leading in this respect has really resulted in a lot of progress and always room for more. I want to just take a focus, I guess, more internally, and that is, even though we're making some progress, there's still a lack of gender and racial diversity among the senior level leadership here at CalPERS, and particularly on the heels of some of the rebalancing we've had to do in the investment office with respect to our emerging managers program. I wanted to see, Madam Chair, if we could have a report back on some of the initiatives that we started a few years ago with respect to how to diversify the top investment office positions. And with one source of that potential diversity now not necessarily at our available to us, but just what the plans are for continuing to look at diversifying the top positions in the investment office.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that as committee chaired by Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support Ms. Yee's request also to report back on that. The couple of questions, the mandatory disclosure for corporate companies of their boards. When I was in Washington talking to one of the congressmen, she was sponsoring legislation to require that for females on corporate boards. What's the status of that legislation?
Sorry. Thank you for the question. I don't believe that legislation has gone far. I would have to go back and check. I think our advocacy team was involved in talking to the members of Congress, and I believe that was actually legislation which was sponsored by Representative Maxine Waters, if I'm not mistaken. And
there was another lady from one of the middle states, as I recall. I don't remember her name because I met with her.
We can check and come back. I'm coming back to the investment committee in March to talk about the processes and forward looking. I can check with our advocacy team and see where we are with that legislation and our involvement.
Because at the same time, I requested that why not sponsor legislation that would also include race and ethnicity. And her comments were that she didn't think she can get it through at the time, but she thought she can get it through for the females. So that's why I'm asking what's the status of that particular legislation. The other question I have is, well, 800, that's a good growth in terms of where the 3D all started, and when corporations were indicating that they couldn't find diverse board members to put on their boards. The 2,800 you made reference to, you said there were other partners?
That was Equilon.
That's the total within the Equila Diversity Network, which is 24 partner organizations, including 3D. So it is the Latino Corporate Directors Association, for example. It is the Catalyst. It is Ascend. It is Black Enterprise. It is Women Corporate Directors. So the combination of those is about 2,800.
Okay. Yes. So when we were managing that 3D program, I recall we made changes to its parameters, et cetera. So now if there are suggested changes from CalPERS, how does that get implemented through this new mechanism with Equilar?
We work closely with Equila. I think our relationship extends beyond just 3D. For example, in terms of the executive compensation, which I've talked to, I've presented to the board. They actually host our proprietary model within their platform because they have the data. So we actually work really closely with Equila, and if we need any changes to be made, that's something which we can make. And in terms of administering the 3D, that's actually something which we do internally in terms of the administration of 3D. A member of my team is responsible for that. So we have that direct relationship with Equila, which has been fantastic, both from the 3D and also from the executive compensation side of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
and Mr. Jones,
yes.
I just met with the head of Equilar within the last couple of weeks, and there is new mapping functionality available that helps us to, when we are interviewing candidates, even for C-suite jobs, which is what we're planning on using the Equilar database for, as well as to source some of our C-suite opportunities. But you now have mapping, and so you see the professional network of every one of these candidates. So what's really important to us is that we have people who come in and advocate for these candidates, or someone who we know has worked with that individual before we bring them into a high-level position here at CalPERS. And so they've implemented this mapping functionality, and I think what might be helpful is for the board to see some of that again during the July offsite.
Okay, good. Great
good
suggestion. Great suggestion. And the last question, what is the target date for the D&I conference by CalPERS in Sacramento?
Diversity Forum.
We just had it.
Well, are you talking about the diversity forum that we share with CalSTRS?
Right.
Yes.
I don't know that we have a date established at this point, but as soon as we do, I'll find out here, and if we have an announcement to make, I'll make that. But I haven't heard.
Okay, I would like to know that.
Yes.
Because we had an annual program and then we moved to 2 years, and I'm concerned about moving to a 3-year program. So let's make sure that
We're still on the 2-year, or not quite 2-year mark. I think we're actually doing it about every year and a half, but we're certainly not moving it after 3 years.
Okay.
I think it's just that we don't know about the dates. I'm sure the planning has already started.
Thank you. Okay.
Ms. Oliveras?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this report. It's very insightful. I'm concerned about some of the numbers, particularly in the investment office. Having worked in investments for quite a while, I understand that there's not a lot of diversity in the industry. But a couple questions. Is there a reason why we're not separating ethnicity and race?
There's no reason. I don't think. We could probably pull that out. We haven't done it that way, and for consistency, we just keep it the same. We have each one of the reports we've done, but upon request, I'm sure we can do that.
Because a person can be, for example, Latino and be of multiple races.
Yeah.
So I think that might be more insightful. Do we only consider gender on a binary basis?
I believe so.
Could we possibly look at other options for that too?
Yeah, so all of this data is sourced through the CalHR survey that's done, and so we can certainly work with Arena. I know she's here to make sure that that happens, and we do have an update on how we're doing that in the health program.
Great. And then I'd like to know more about the executives in the investment office. Do we know what percent or number are Latinas, African American women, Native American women?
We only know if they have self-disclosed,
Yes.
and so if it's not listed in this report. And what is the effective date of this report, Mr. Fox?
This is through the last fiscal year, so through July of 19.
Okay. So there have been some additional changes that have happened in the investment
Sure.
office since the publication or since the collection of this data. But again, it's self-reported
Marcy?
information.
Can you pull the microphone?
Sir. It's self-reported information, and if this is effective as of the end of the fiscal year, there have been some changes in top appointments in the investment office.
Would it be possible to see that? So executive level in the investment office by different gender types, by ethnicity and race, and then the intersection of the two?
We can certainly do it by gender, and then whatever has been self-identified through this process, we can certainly do that.
And I also want to say good work on corporate board diversity. I think leadership is very important. And I think the board here, I mean, we can also look at our own diversity, right? This ends up being a very diverse board, but we should also look at our leadership. And if we're doing a good job with our leadership and making sure that it's diverse. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ms. Middleton.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to second all of the comments from Ms. Oliveros and thank her for those. As I was going through the report, I found one mention of individuals with disability, but no data whatsoever regarding our efforts in that respect. And I found not a single mention of LGBTQ employees or our efforts at working with corporate boards in that area. That is disappointing. We have an opportunity to play a leadership role, and we need to play that leadership role. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rubalcava.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I join everybody in thanking you for the report, very insightful. I noticed in the staff report that there's a reference of some internal activities, the 12th Annual Diversity Inclusion Day, the Disability Awareness Month, and then something called the Altitude for Gratitude event. Those are very nice. We should announce them when they're coming up so the board will know about them. And I encourage you to continue those efforts. Second, in the last slide, the next steps, I commend you that you're continuing the engagement efforts, particularly on the proxy voting and shareholder campaigns, especially given the SEC's current stance on proxy stuff. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. And Ms. Oliveros.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, as we look at our inclusion efforts, I wanted to state that California is a majority-minority state. Latinos are the majority of the population now. We're more than 40%. So it outweighs proportionately all the other ethnicities and races in terms, but I don't see any of that representation here. I know we're subject to Prop 209, but I hope that we could do a better job recruiting and providing an inclusive environment. What more can we do, whether it's here on the board and making sure we represent that leadership or CalPERS as a staff?
Mm-hmm. If we're talking about CalPERS as an organization, so the first thing we work on is culture. Right? So having a culture that feels inclusive to the people who are working here so that they then promote CalPERS as a destination employer to others. That's really important. It's why we spend so much time focusing on culture, and it is why we are focused on improving the engagement goal, because that's the way these questions are written, that I'm confident that I can refer others to work at CalPERS and that it appropriately represents the diversity of the state or the community in which I live. So we can get you those questions so you can see what we're trying to accomplish and the importance of increasing the score in those areas. The second, I really believe that it's more important what people say about the organization more than what we say about ourselves. So again, having the board, having others here working at CalPERS, having other entities really refer CalPERS as a place to work where people can be successful. So I think as you're out, I know you do a lot of traveling out into the investment community. I know others of you do a lot of travel out into the member community. I think taking some of our jobs that we have open, because you're right, Prop 209 does limit our ability to do preferences. But what's really important is that we cast a very wide net. We get a very strong candidate pool. We have the appropriate processes internally to make sure that all candidates have a fair process to go through. And ultimately, we get the best talented candidate. And so I think you all could help in taking job announcements out to the communities in which you're working and serving, and getting people to apply for some of our positions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to add that the full report is available on the external-facing website. It'll have a lot more detailed information than what we provided here. This is a summary of our report, but the report has been online, I think, for 6 days now on the outward-facing site, and I think that's within your Insight tool as well. But again, taking some of the information that we received here, we'll see if we can't improve upon that and make it more comprehensive.
Thank you.
It sounds like direction to the committee, or to the committee chair, is that we give, for this particular report, we give as much information as we can. And then I guess I think that's it. So we are on summary of committee direction, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a number of items, so please let me know if I've missed anything. Okay. First, going back to 60, the report on participating employers. Member Middleton's request for additional data from that appendix chart, as well as a refresh of the report's format. On 7A, we'll create a code section cross-reference in terms of the CalPERS authority that's coming, the references that are coming out of the delegation. 7B, we'll be back with April regulations that will incorporate the optional attestation conversation, as well as we'll bring you some further examples of booklets versus candidate statements, those types of options. 7C, we will incorporate the annual fee amounts and fund balances into our April budget document. 7D on the BERA contract, we will provide periodic updates on the project, as well as the follow-up information brought by Member Oliveris, further discussion there. And then on the diversity report that we just finished, we'll incorporate additional information as much as possible, including the number of overlapping board members that are on multiple boards, as well as further information that we have regarding CalPERS employees. Diversity will also bring back an investment office diversity report in terms of the status of initiatives and the legislative status on mandatory disclosure that President Jones requested.
Okay, good. I wanted to make sure we got everything. It looks like everything I wrote down you have. Does anybody
Perfect.
have anything that I missed?
Faster this time.
Faster, backwards. All right. At this point, we are open for public comment. If somebody would like to make public comment. Seeing none, the Finance Administration Committee meeting is adjourned, and the perf comp is, that would be you, David? 11:45? All right, 11:45, 15 minutes.